Welcome to SoundMindBeats YouTube channel where we cover all things audio. Please like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and if you want to get involved in the conversation, please leave a comment.
Ryan.
What's up?
What's up, dude?
Greetings, good sir.
Right on time, man. I expect nothing less.
I'm trying to be good with the schedule. I think it's important.
Usually I'm the late one.
It's like first lesson of the day, kids. Show up on time.
Be on time. My wife's like, if you're on time, you're 10 minutes late.
There is always that, there's always those old school wisdom that, to be on time is to be late, to be early is to be on time, that kind of thing.
It kind of is too. I mean, it's funny because we went and ate lunch with the in-laws, and we got there like, I want to say 20 minutes early. So we're waiting in the parking lot, and I'm just looking at her. I'm like, every time we get here so early. She's like, it's not that early. And I agree with her, but I give her crap.
Oh, totally. I think that I'm not sure how the wives of the world feel. They're probably the same, but I know for me that it's like my wife will always give me that kind of wisdom and it kind of keep me in check.
Yes.
So it's like, and then of course you're in the moment, you're like, I don't need you to tell me that, but I probably do.
It's so funny because I feel the same way, the exact same way.
Yeah. I was funny. I was talking with somebody else the other day, and it's interesting that you were sort of talking about some of these things like yesterday on your live with just the nature of the business. But one of those things for sure is always, and whether it's personal or professional, like cultivating the relationships that not only benefit you, but you're a benefit to others. Like that is just something that's like, it can never be like overstated as how important that is. And the reliability factor of like you as a friend, as a brother, as a husband, as a son, showing up when those people need you, and also knowing that they would show up for you. And it's the same thing in the in our industry. Like somebody calls you for a project, you gotta be ready to show up and do the work, and also know that when you need something that, you're overtaxed, you might have a deadline you just can't meet, or something that's out of your wheelhouse. You're like, I've got a network of people that I've built those relationships on trust. That you can reach out to them, they can reach out to you, and the world's generally a better place when we all do that, I think.
It's music to my ears, no pun intended, but that's my perspective in life. It's like Dempsey and I talk, right? Like sometimes we'll go a month or whatever and don't speak to each other, but always pick back up as it was yesterday. Whenever he needs me for something, I need him for something, like we got each other's back. And that's like, it's super important, like life happens, and so that's understandable, but like having that faith and that trust in the people that are around you, your family, your friends, your network, knowing like I could call them at any moment and like get help if I need it. It's important. It really is. But you got to be that person for them as well. So it goes both ways.
I mean, the relationships, professionally and personally, I think always are best when they're mutually beneficial.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I say this, like, don't be the dead weight. It's so important. Like we can't drag you along with us. Like you have to be an active member of whatever you're involved in, that you're bringing something to the table as the other person has to be mutual, like mutually beneficial for everybody.
Of course. I mean, it's it's something we can expand on, are those obviously you're from an audio professional, your core competencies, got to have that down. And then you're consistently trying to just get better. But not only does that benefit you, but it benefits the other people. And I know that you are doing the exact same thing. You've got all the basics down, but you're still working on refining those basics and then improving upon the more advanced type of things. And then that benefits you. But it's like I need something, I know I can call you. And you'd be like, so I'm not the guy to be programming Beatz. I don't need to be, so I'm going to call you. And if you need something, it's like, tracking some acoustic drums. Okay, yeah, I got you, no problem. It is like think about being on an airplane. They're always like, put your mask on first, and then help the people around you. Like if we're all focusing in on being the best personal and professional versions of ourselves, then when somebody really needs the help, you already know that they're not the person that's just always asking for help first. They've probably gone through a series of things and done their own work and said, like, I don't know about this thing. Maybe I should learn about it. And then you realize, okay, this might be over my head. I've exhausted my own personal options. Now I'm going to reach out to somebody that just might be better suited for it.
I love that. I love how you're putting all this, because that is like my premise too, is like you start to build up certain skill sets, and then get somewhat good or decent at it. Right. And we could start to utilize those for each other. But at the end of the day, I'm always looking like, what can I improve on? I don't care how far I've gotten quite yet. I always know that there's something left in the tank. I haven't hit my limitation yet. And that right there, I think that mentality alone is the building blocks for success, because like it's all about improvement and getting as good as you possibly can at it. And what that yields is what you like. It's what you dream of. I say it all the time. I'm like, I don't care about Grammys or trophies. Never really have. I knew the work was most important. And so as long as I became exceptionally good at what I do, and then I'm reliable, that people can trust in me, they have faith in me, that Grammys come from that. Your Emmys come from that. Your TV placements come from that. It comes from being, really, really good and diligent at what you do. And the rest will start to fall in place. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, I remember, as a young drummer, one of the big things out there was Modern Drummer magazine. It's sort of like how we used to have Recording magazine or Mix magazine or Tape Op or something. And as a kid, I would just be reading that thing inside and out, like cover to cover. I was so excited when it came in. This is before you could just get, online delivery. I had to wait for my subscription to show up in the mailbox, and I'd just be devouring that magazine. But they would always do this sort of, maybe every, quarterly, biannually, they'd have this studio drummers roundtable, and they'd bring in all these like session cats that everybody's heard of, and they played on a million records. And like one month it might be the Nashville guys, and one month it's the New York people or the LA team. And I remember reading about like the Nashville thing, and I know that this still holds true today, but they were talking about everybody that's in town, that doesn't have like a trust fund or a day job. If you're there longer than 6 months and you can survive, more than likely you are technically capable of doing the work. But then they would say like, okay, yeah, everybody that's here, we already know you're capable of doing the work. It then comes down to not only is like, who's the right particular player for a certain project, or the right producer, the right mixer, but it's like, who's reliable? Back when you used to have a Rolodex, just I got 25 pedal steel guys that I could call today for this gig. And then I'm going to go like, well, yeah, I know they're all good enough to do it. Who's fun to be around and doesn't bring the energy and the vibe of the session down? Who's going to show up on time? And especially back in the day, and I'm sure that it's still a thing today, but it's like, and who's going to show up sober?
Oh, you're nailing it, dude. This is all real. Like, it's so real, especially in our industry.
And a lot of times, God, you were saying something yesterday. There's like, I don't know if, or maybe Dish said it, like with the IRS, there's 30,000 professional musicians, which that number seems so small to me. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's like what you actually classify yourself on your taxes for.
Right.
But like you think about, God, how competitive, even with that small number, how competitive it is. And it all comes down to, are you a good hang? Can you do the job? And do not come in causing drama, taking away from whatever value you might be bringing to the table. It's like, I mean, I personally know a good handful of musicians that are phenomenal players, and I could give them a chart. I could just give them an idea. I could hum something, and they're going to come up with a brilliant part. But I don't call them because they're a pain, or it's just not worth the baggage that they bring to the table, or it's like dealing with dealing with monitor mixing on the live side. That is such a great experience because you find these people that it's almost to the point of like, number one, as an artist, I want to meet your needs. So nothing is getting in the way of you being able to give me the gift that you have. You know, even if I'm giving you money for your time and your talent, like I need to remove the obstacles from you. But there's that level of here's the normal obstacle line where everything has to at least hit here. And then you try to make it a little bit better. But there's some people that like, they can't perform until you get it way up here. And it's like, can you move this thing in my left ear? Doing headphone mixes for tracking sessions. Like I'll listen to something like, yeah, I could totally work with this. Is it the most pristine thing? Is it like perfectly sculpted? It's already, album release ready? No, probably not. Certainly enough that you hear pitch, time, rhythm. You understand the feel and the emotional intent of what the track is that you're playing along with. But then sometimes it's like, God, yeah, I could call old Barney to come in and play keys, but man, dude, it's going to take 2 hours just to get him happy with his headphone mix. And unless you're on some monster budget that you have that amount of time, I mean, sometimes it's like, dude, yeah, the juice isn't worth the squeeze.
This might be the single most important topic when it comes to like becoming a professional engineer or actually doing this as your profession versus not. Because you're saying some really, really important things here. We are in no shortage of talented musicians at all. They're everywhere.
They're more today than ever before. Like learning the craft. Like remember, I started to cut you off, but how hard it was for us to learn stuff when we were younger. There just weren't the resources.
Absolutely.
And you had to rely on a mentor, and hopefully it was a good mentor or somebody to, and like so many of the things that I've learned are from my own mistakes, which I still think is a tremendous learning tool. But yeah, there is no shortage now because I don't want to say the work is never easy, but the access to the knowledge is like James was saying last week, like, yeah, we've perfected electronics.
Decades ago. Yeah. It's all at our fingertips.
I'm not going to make the knowledge for you to learn is so available. It's just left for you to learn it. But I'm sorry, you were saying like,
well, no, and you're right, man. And like what it really boils down to is, especially when we're walking out of the hobbyist space and trying to become a professional, when you and I are looking to hire people or work with people, it's always going to boil down to like, how do we get along? Like if you're going to be a pain and you're going to take this 30-minute job and turn it into a 2-hour job because we got to do all these things to pamper you, more than likely I'm not bringing you back to the studio. And I actually have like dozens and dozens of these stories. My wife knows. She knows several of the artists. She's not really welcome back because you made this way harder than what it was. And there's multiple reasons for this. I think every artist and musician should believe in themselves wholeheartedly.
If you don't, man, nobody else will.
Yeah, 100%. Faith until you make it all the way. Like, bring that energy. But at the end of the day, like, humble yourself when you're around other musicians and you're getting stuff done. Like, sometimes you're just there to do a job, and so it isn't time to like push your opinion and idea and this and that, right? If you're just there for the job, get the job done, and being reliable, being easy to work with. That's what separates the people that get the most jobs and not. It's not talent. It's the ones that are like, we already know you're going to get the job done. I have faith in you. Right. If you're the most talented person in the room, but your success rate of getting a job done is like 20%, we're not even going to bother, Right. It's just not going to, it's not good for business. And so, yeah.
There is the, on the business side, it's the ROI.
Yeah, exactly.
Your cost benefit analysis of stuff like, it's the same kind of thing like buying a piece of gear. Like I'm always eyeballing, these boutique, items and checking out, ooh, what's Stam have and what's Audioscape have, and dude, it'd be awesome to get that. And I'm like,
dude, don't need it.
Do I need it? Is it like, am I gonna? And we're always looking at the tools of the trade to make our life easier, to make our time more efficient. But again, it's like, how much is it going to cost me? And am I really going to get the long-term value out of that? Or is it just a cool to have kind of a thing?
I think I get like almost most frustrated with that because people are always like, try this, do that. And I'm like, I'm at a point right now where I'm like, I really have everything I need. Is there stuff I could buy for sure? 100%. But like, I'm with you. Like, I'd love to look at that stuff. I was actually just looking at some 1176s this morning. I'm like, I don't need these. What am I doing right now? And it gets down to that. Like, it's what you said. It's the ROI. So it's not just the money we spend, it's the time we spend. And technically time is more important than money. If you ask me, you can't get it back. And it's got to be like, if you're doing business, like you really got to be smart about where you're spending your time. It makes or breaks you, and like when I think about, talking about talent, right? Back in the day in my band, he ended up getting signed and so he became pretty successful in the industry, but he was our bass player. And this guy was just insanely talented, like mind-blowingly good. And we didn't want to get rid of him, but he would barely show up.
Right.
We had a super important show and he was there 2 hours late and the crowd is getting restless and pissed. Yeah, it was
2
bad.
hours?
Yeah, he did it to us multiple times. And it's like,
oh my goodness,
you got to go, dude. Like, this isn't working, you're super talented, but if you don't care, then why should we?
Well, of course. I mean, that is the crux of everything sort of personally and professional. Like, again, you have to do your own work to be successful. And constantly relying on other people to effectively cover your shortcomings. Like, there's a positive aspect of that. Like, say, like, there's a funny thing. The cover band that I'm currently playing in, we had an issue. Like, one of the guys used to play keys on a song, and he's a great player and great guitar player. And we decided that, he's going to shift to playing a second guitar part on this tune. And we had the key part tracked because it was like, well, okay, there's only 5 of us and we're trying to have 6 or 7 voices happening. So it's more important to have the live guitar than the background pad key stuff. And, being fair, he didn't do his part of ensuring he had the new parts down guitar wise. He's like, oh, it's in my head. I'll just play it. And there was something happening that on one of the tunes, and like, I'm just sitting there playing. I'm like, something sounds squirrely here. And he didn't have that sort of thought process initially of, hey, you've got other people here with you. You can rely on us. We're going to hold it down. And if you weren't playing the part right at that moment, cool. The second time you tried it and it didn't land, you should have stopped. Like, don't go for the third. Knowing that you have a support system is super important, and that you can rely on the people around. That's all. Again, like, sports, being in a band, being on a production team, knowing that you've got somebody there that will fill it in, and it's okay if you like drop out for a second and regroup because you've got another guitar player, you've got pre-recorded keyboard tracks, you've got a solid rhythm section. Like that would have been totally fine. You don't have to do that, and that's a positive side of relying on people. But when your default is always to rely on other people, I could be late to the show. What's the big deal? You guys will cover it. Like, that is not the way to rely on people. That's just becoming dependent upon them. You're not relying on anybody at all. Yeah,
it's causing all kinds of issues. Not just being late. Like, you're letting all kinds of people down at that point. And you're so right about, like, that's what the band is there for. That's what a team is there for, technically. Yes. Like, I mean, that's what your family's there for. Sometimes, we drop the ball. And if you have someone that will pick it up for you, like, I got you real quick. Like, that's what it's all about. And I mean, it's funny, like, going back to my band and thinking about our performance, there's one song, we crushed it too. And we did a whole, what do they call that? Unplugged thing.
Right.
and filmed it, and
as everybody does in that era, right?
Yeah, it was a super cool experience. And my sister and I were the vocalists, and I'll never forget it. We get into a section where the band just goes off. It's like a bridge section. Guitarist is going crazy, drummer's going crazy, bassist going crazy, and we're not supposed to do anything.
Right.
We bled into it. We're just feeling it out, right? And you could see our face on stage being like, we're in the wrong section here.
Yeah, that happens, man.
It looks seamless too. Like when you watch it back, like on stage, it feels like awful because we prepared for this and now we know we made a mistake. However, when we watch it back, it's like, oh, the whole team just, it all blended together. Like it was seamless. Like it should have been done that way. And that I thought was super cool.
Ooh, this question just popped in, and I think that it certainly dovetails from New Jersey Playboy. I get it. Yeah, should an artist stick to their job and stop trying to be an engineer, a producer, etc.? Yes. That from a sort of base level philosophical principle, absolutely. Like if you're there to play bass guitar, I need you to focus on playing bass guitar and playing the absolute best, highest level of, technique, of musicianship, of taste, of sensibility. Everybody needs to do their part. And you're right. I've been in so many sessions where, somebody in the second violin section, they might have a valid point in bringing something up, but most times it's certainly not the right time that it's brought up. And oftentimes it's not allowing those other people in, let's say, a conductor or a producer role or the engineer role to do their job and giving them the same mutual respect that you would want to have. It's like, I don't need you to tell me how to play my instrument. Like, it dilutes the process. And then it comes a time, like, usually, especially if you're just on the player side and you're working on a session, even if it's your band and you've hired a producer, I mean, it's kind of like, you're a sports team that hired in a contract coach. Like, why did you hire the producer if you're just going to sharpshoot everything and then tell them how to do their job? I think that even regardless if in that moment they might have needed it, it creates this whole other dynamic that just it crushes momentum as one of the biggest things that it crushes. But it starts to create the environment where, well, I heard this, and then somebody else chimes in, well, shouldn't we do it this way? Like, then you get that suffering of too many cooks in the kitchen, and oftentimes let's say a note's out of tune, like somebody just clams something, more than likely, if they're a pro, they already know they did it.
Yep.
Doesn't need somebody outside of their section of their responsibility to say, I think somebody in the trumpet section was out of tune. Like, they already know. And it's not your place to say it.
Don't be a buzzkill. That's really what it is. And feel the energy. Like, there's times where, I'm sure you get into it. Like, you'll do something, you got to turn around and be like, what do you guys think? That's when it's time to give your opinion, Right. But other than that, like, stopping something right in the middle of like a flow state, which has happened to me many times, it's just such a big buzzkill. And they're like, what if you did this cool delay that delayed at a 16th and an 8th and a 4th, and then it went down 4 or 5 octaves? Like, you're killing me.
There's already like so many of those memes where the artist is like, I need you to pull a Q of 2.8 at 1.6 by 7.3 dB. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Sure, dude. We'll do that. And a lot of that time also, like, we were talking sort of like when I got in and where it is now. God, there's no budget for that.
No, not at all.
Spend your budget on getting the best possible people. Oh, yes. Don't fly the plane if you're not the pilot. Amen, dude. Amen. Like, there's no time for that. So I'm bringing you in to play bass. I'm bringing you in to play drums, to sing backup vocals. You know, the time to speak up is when you're saying, hey, I need to do a note check on the chart. Like, I've executed the part you hired me to do. I'm just hearing something that might be, and they might be like, oh yeah, that should be an F natural, not an F sharp. Good. Thanks for bringing that up. You know, because again, like if you hire me, the chart says F sharp, I'm going to play F sharp. I'm going to sing F sharp, whatever it is.
Yep.
You know, that's a positive thing to bring up. But usually, you know, again, if everybody's done their job on the tight timeline that we have today, on tight budgets, then hopefully that gets eliminated before, you know, you even run the chart down one time while you're getting levels, you know.
Yeah, especially if you have a team. I think it's always wise to have production meetings beforehand, kind of like get everyone's gist in terms of, okay, what is the sound we're going for? What's your idea? What's your idea? Maybe get down a you know, some sort of rough, you know, and then you could critique those type of things where everyone's getting their say. You know, like I think that's important for a team, but like there's got to be some sort of structure that you, when you approach records, that it's like, this is what we're going to do so we don't run into something midway that should have been done in the beginning, you know, and now we're going back and we're kind of piecing things up. You know, it's just breaking the flow of things.
I think this might be dating myself. I think the new term is like somebody who's a pick-me. I think I'm using it correctly. Tell me in the comments if I'm not, but like,
I don't think so, actually.
Okay. Somebody who's a know-it-all,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that comes in and it's just like, yeah, I don't need that. And I will say this, that I've seen this, I wouldn't say like an overwhelming amount of time, but enough that it's also a thing. Often that person who is really chiming in outside of their lane, then later on down the road makes a mistake because they're not focusing in on their specific task at hand. Like, handle your biz, man. Like, I just need you to play the viola part, you know, unless you're the string arranger or string producer, you know, on this session, I just need you to play the part, you know, to the very best of your abilities. You know?
Yeah, I did an album. I think this was like in 2010. So this is a long time ago, but it's very memorable because that artist, oh man, I mean, I think I lost my hair because of it. And it was an insane project. And this guy just wanted his opinion and hands in everything. And I remember how brutal it was. My wife even mentions it. We still talk about it to this day. And I'm like, I will never go through that again. A lot of times I could recognize it from the beginning if that's going to be the type of artist that I'm about to work with. Right. And I'll kindly tell him, like, I don't think I'm the right person for the job.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this again. There's no way.
There is a bit of self-preservation in that, of like, you know, it depends upon the project. And, you know, I know we've all dealt with like the higher the level of something or the higher the pay, oftentimes that adds more pressure. You're like,
big time.
You know, like, yeah, you get some call to do a Beyonce record, which I haven't got a call to do a Beyonce record, but like you're probably willing to endure much more.
Yeah.
You know, in that thing we talked about a couple of weeks ago, about you're sort of chasing, like, dude, if I just get this one record, it's gonna totally, my career is gonna jump off, you know. Eddie Curious is asking, like, both of you have dealt with hundreds of musicians. Yes, you know, Rob's been doing this for almost like 20 years. I've been 30 years in, both as an engineer and a musician. You know, it's one of those things. Like, yeah, I used to do a ton of orchestral recording where you're working with an 80 or 100 piece ensemble. You know, I mean, that already, like, you know, you can do tons of like 5-6 piece bands and you're going to add up those numbers over time. You know, get a 5-piece band and you do 20 sessions. Well, there's 100 players that you've interfaced with. Yeah. Then you start adding like an orchestra where there's 100 players on the session. You know, those you know, your player count like easily just jumps up that way for sure. And then like live gigs, you know, you're house sound engineer at some club where there's a different act every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Like, you're going to build up a lot of experience over a relatively short period of time. And there's still those staff engineer jobs that are out there. If you're lucky enough to be in a market that has a facility and happens to be hiring. I mean, that's how so many people really was the old school way of learning is you were the runner on a session and you just sat there and you quietly watched, and then maybe you're an assistant or you're there just like you're prepping mics, you're wrapping cable, you're ensuring that the patching is correct, and then maybe you're assistant tracking engineer, or you have to fill in because somebody had some bad huevos rancheros for breakfast. They got to pop out of the control room. True story, not for me. Some other guy, But yeah, it's easy to build those numbers up when you're working with other people, for sure.
It's so different these days. However, I think that this can still be a super effective business plan if you are like a home studio or you have a commercial space and you're trying to build up a client base. Is hit these local shows.
Oh yeah.
Try to get in good with the promoters. And this is what we did back in the day. And you go backstage or however they got it set up, right? Sometimes just at bars and they're just drinking in the bar with you or whatever. Go introduce yourself to those artists and invite them back to your studio. Yeah. Offer them free studio time. You could get so much experience doing this, and this is what we did back in the day. This is why my buddy's studio became like number one in the state, is because we'd hit the shows every Friday and Saturday. Got in good with all the promoters, literally got to know everybody in the entire scene, and then we were the main guys. Like, you got a whole set of rappers going in to do a show. We were the main guys that everyone's telling, go there to get your recordings right. These guys know what they're doing, and that's a great way to build rapport, especially locally. But the experience part is so important. It's so important, and that there's got to be, at least for me, like even to this day, I'm like, I got to have at least a mix a day, Right. But I try to do multiple and like doing something, and I could do my own production, but that's more in the mindset of I want to gain more experience, because like you said too earlier, you learn so much through your mistakes. And
or you should at least.
Totally. Yeah. Like if you understand the basics, you understand, how to at least, set up a mic, right? Record someone decently and this and that. That's great, but you're not going to learn anything if you're not actually doing it, right? If you understand it, that's one thing. But if you're doing it every day, you start to understand like, okay, these were all the rules laid out. However, I might have to bend them a little bit for this job. And that's when you really start to gain experience and like, do things that advance you forward.
Yeah. I've got a friend up, shout out. His name's James Alessio. He's down in Florida now. Awesome drummer, awesome front of house engineer. He did some recording, but I mean, live sound was his thing. But as the advent of the digital console came out, so many of them are not only are they a digital live console, but they're also an interface. So he started just bringing his laptop and multi-tracking every band's show that he would mix.
Ooh, wow.
And then he'd be like, after the show, he'd like, mix. Hey, I recorded the show.
Dude.
It's like, I could do a mix for you. And he was able to like do that same thing. Not only are you like hitting the clubs, but he was in, that catbird seat. He was able to sit there and like proactively take an idea on how to increase his own client base, not only on the live side, but then he would take the live tracks, and especially in the cover band world, you're always looking for new material. And if you're doing, you're not on a tour, but you're, the house engineer at some, 800 seater where those brand new up and coming, like the band's touring off their first record or EP kind of artist, like they don't have the budget to bring in a remote truck and do all this stuff. But if someone's like, hey, yeah, I'll give you a mix down of the show if you'd like, and simple things like $300, and of course you're not making any money doing the, the ROI on it, but that first bit of, not only are you just, oh yeah, I don't remember what the house guy was, at the 930 club, and they've forgotten about you. But when you deliver that mix back to them, and oftentimes, again, like gain structure, if you had good levels for your front of house, probably it's good levels for record, and then you just remix the thing as if you were doing one. And that's what I do oftentimes. Like I'll go through and just take the live show. I'm not doing a ton of automation or anything. You'll cut out some dead space and that, but I'm just gonna get some EQs that work, and I'll hit start, and then I'll hit record on a recorder, and I'll just remix the live show as if I'm doing it. But I already have the knowledge of when the guitar solo is coming up, when there's a little feature here and there, and you can just like literally mix it. And for my friend James, he got so much more work out of that. Then the next time some band came back through town, they're like, yeah, can we make sure that he's on the show? And it's like, again, you're building out your client base. And again, going to shows is important. And again, I cannot stress, at least for me, how beneficial having the live sound experience has been for my recording career. And on the recording side, I've worked with some acts that don't know that I do live stuff. And there have been, we love how the album sounds. I wish it could sound this way live. And I'm like, I know a guy that already knows your catalog and your material. Like, I'd be happy to come out and mix it live for you.
Eddie said this. He said, both of you collaborate with artists that you're never actually in the room with.
Oh, today, all the time. It's probably, it's the norm. And we talked about this probably, I think, like 3 weeks ago. Like, I wish that it wasn't. There's such a magic that happens when you get everybody in a room together, and there's this creative energy and a collaboration that happens. And sometimes, like, you'll notice it, like if you're a musician, kind of traditional musician, playing in bands, or I used to do a lot of jazz gigs, which is highly an improvisational like art form. Like, you've got an arrangement, you've got chord changes, you've got a melody, and then people just start soloing and they start playing off of each other. And I've done sessions like where I'm playing in a very basic tune, but you happen to hear like the pianist did this little thing there, and like, oh hey, that was cool. Let me listen for this other stuff, and you start not deviating so far from what the purpose and intent is. Like, I'm still there doing my job, but somebody just does a thing that like sparks you, and you're like, oh hey, I'm going to start like maybe mimicking a little bit of the sort of rhythmic outline somebody else is doing that might not have been written down on my original lead sheet. But man, it's creating a cool thing, and it actually makes the product so much better than piecemealing it together, from all that remote work. But yeah, remote it just is what it is today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I pretty much, I got a session tomorrow. Like a few times I do sessions, but 95% of my work is remote. And you know what? I'm going to skim through this real quick. Hopefully I could pull it out. I'm paraphrasing. Do you know who Billy Hume is?
Yes. Yeah.
So he's got his YouTube. Yeah. His YouTube channel is incredible. I mean, I wish I had half his knowledge, but he just did a video on this, and he was describing his experience in the industry, because obviously he came from when it was fully analog.
Right.
And then went digital. And Billy Hume describes this like, how can I put this? Like, everything back in the day was recorded.
Right.
And so like these days, like not everything is not recorded, but like mostly vocals are just recorded. There's a lot of like MIDI and things that are, involved even in rock records these days. Right. And he was talking about just miking stuff up, right? Miking up a cabinet, and how the air in the room and the energy of the room, the humidity in the room,
of course,
adds a character to the recording.
Sure.
And so I was really thinking a lot about this when I was watching that. And I'm like, maybe bringing back reamping and doing stuff like this for like remote stuff might not be a bad idea, so we could get those characteristics back into our records. Right. And he's so right, because, and he really went detailed in this. If y'all don't know who it is, please like go check out the video on YouTube, because I thought that he gave an incredible explanation on how music is kind of, I don't want to call it watered down, but it's just like taking it's a little bit of a step backwards in terms of how we're doing it and how it sounds, you know? Yeah. And I think that like he kind of pinpointed, like I've always had the perspective of it's because we're not in the room together, because there is an energy we all feel when we're doing it together. However, there's also an energy the microphones are picking up, and like it's everything about that day that is magical, you know? And I think thinking about doing stuff like that just to kind of try to get that element back into your records isn't a bad idea.
Yeah, it's you know, for those that are just recently tuning in for this, this is something that we, not to be repetitive, but it's worth repeating. You know, it's that total combination of things that come together, and you're trying to go for a particular sound, and our ears, you know, through a lot of Western music, have really been shaped by all the recordings we've ever listened to. And now with everything being so in the box, which is great, there's so much convenience, and like there's probably nearly every pro record that you're listening to is at least 95% in the box. Yep. You know, if you had to probably put an average to it, like, you know, you might have a cool piece of analog gear that you run something through, and more than likely you're running it through and you're printing that down, so you don't have to sit there and, you know, leave something in an insert kind of deal to go to your patch bay. But now with all this modern convenience and modern technology, you know, we see it so much more often than not, is like we're trying to get back, and it's what and I think I just saw James you know, hopped on here, like we're trying to get back to making things sound the way they did. You know, we never had to worry about saturation, because everything was adding those harmonics from the mic pre to the channel strip on the console, through the bus, through whatever. Like you're getting all of that stuff, and you're talking especially with the MIDI. And we were even talking last week, like running that stuff back through a set of mic pre's just to get, and even just getting level. You're not even like pushing the pre to get a ton of breakup or some kind of like true like audible distortion, but you're just adding that stuff back in that was always there in the past, you know, filling in the blank space. I saw actually something that, I'm not a super fan of this particular channel, but there are a couple guys that were out there talking about stuff, and they were talking about working with Max Martin, and he had
I know what channel you're talking about.
Yeah, he had some, and you know, no shame. Like,
yeah, it is what it is.
It's just it's not my workflow. It's not my perspective.
Me too. Yeah.
But he was just talking about like, you know, having some like white noise that was so minute, buried in the track, and noticing how that, I mean, you're adding every harmonic, you know, that's out there.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And just like how that little bit like melded it together, and it wasn't some gold foss or something like that. It was just, they call it, it's like super dither. And I'm like, well, that's a really interesting way, you know, again, so here's a channel that I might not agree with all the perspectives, but that's a very viable perspective.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and you're adding that, but to the main point is we're doing all this stuff to add that stuff back in that used to just be there.
Yep.
You know, to where noise, it wasn't that big of a deal. You know, I mean, you go back, and if anybody, I'm a vinyl collector, and I'll go through and I'll listen to stuff, and like, if I'm mixing a record and I'm hearing some noise, oh God, it bugs me today.
Me too. Yeah.
But when I'm sitting down listening to an LP and you hear a little bit of, I'm like, yeah, that's total character. That's how it's supposed to sound. Dealing with all this orchestral stuff, like when you're dealing with like MIDI samples of a trumpet section, you never hear the key clicks. You never hear like somebody's like blowing spit out of the instrument. You don't hear like a little bit of the scratchiness of a violin bow, but those are all parts of the characteristic of the sound. It's like, and then, you go through and like, we do one thing of trying to bring it backwards. And then another thing, we're trying to remove all of the natural stuff. It's like people like editing vocals. And I think you talked about it one time. Somebody was asking you about cutting out breaths. And a lot of times, man, it's pick and choose.
Yeah.
Sometimes like that, like, and you're like, God, that added so much emotion in that spot. And other times it's like they're out of breath and like they're trying to like, it's like, we can punch that part in. You don't have to like, take all the oxygen out of your lungs and end up with a weak vocal take. But yeah, it's this bizarre world where we're simultaneously altering what's natural and then also trying to return things to what's natural.
Yeah, what an interesting thing. This is what I love saying this, that an engineer's job is to convince the listener that they're listening to something realistic. And here's the funny part about it. Sometimes it needs to be artificial.
Realistic though, right?
Yeah. Sometimes it needs to be artificial, but that still needs to be convincing.
Right.
And the reason why I say this a lot is because like one of my mentors used to say that a lot. I would send him a mix and he'd just be like, I'm not convinced.
Right. Yeah.
And I always knew what he meant. And the thing is to stretch this concept further in real life right now, as we're sitting in our rooms, that is going on.
Yep.
And
it's all around you.
All around you. And if it went silent, it'd probably drive you nuts. Because we're not used to like, there has to be some sort of white noise at all times. And so he actually put it, I think he actually did a great job on that video because I totally agree. And he said that the dimension, the depth and dimension of the record was gone when you take the white noise out. Yeah. And then the reverb and all that would like, it sounds smoother with everything. And so I think that like at the end of the day, the funny part is like digital is it's super, super clean. So when we go back to the saturation term and all this, that's why that had to get introduced into digital, is because it's like, this is too clean.
Right.
Feels like we're in this room with no noise and all we're hearing is everything like just as is, right? When in reality, like you said, the breaths, the little bit of a spit, the riding up the string, the slides, like all of that stuff needs to kind of be in there because that's the part of music that like adds those little characters,
Yeah, it's like fret noise on a guitar.
Oh, I love it. Freaking love it.
This. It's one of the repetitive talks or points that we make here is like the danger of listening in solo too much. Like take a DI bass guitar, and when you really hone in on that, like you'll hear like harmonics that are happening from the finger simply hitting the string right next to the pickup, where if you sit there and like, oh my God, like, and there a lot of times they're not in tune harmonics,
Yeah.
But it's like you'll focus in on that and be like, oh God, I got to get rid of those because you're listening in solo, but you put it back in the mix, like you never hear that stuff, and in fact, it probably is adding some extra kind of, just that low level content that fills in the gaps. Of the zeros and ones. So like, let that stuff ride for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. That's the thing I find about MIDI too. There's artists, speaking of breaths, right? There's an artist that I'm working with right now, and he is super emotional. And like his music is very deep and like it's kind of like how will I describe it? It's sad. It's a lot of like hard topics, right? And he's got a breath that is like crazy emotional. It's like a gasp.
Okay.
If I took that out of his songs, like it wouldn't be even nearly as impactful. Right. I'm like, this is almost more impactful than the words himself because this is that emotion.
Right.
You know, you could feel him like taking a deep breath as that bad thing just happened, you know? And I'm like, this is all part of the record. I just leave it. He's got like spit sometimes and crackles in his voice. And I'm like, all of this is part of the emotion. I'm not touching it, you know? And there's times where it's like, that doesn't belong there. You know, maybe it's annoying or it's off, you know, it just doesn't feel right.
It could be too much. It could be distracting, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, and even like, so I'm making a record for him yesterday, and I want something going back to the emotion, right? I want it sad and really emotional. So I'm going to do some beautiful piano chords, right? And it was just such a challenge to get him to sound emotional because the MIDI, it's just like, it's too fake. There's something that's just like, and even with the, like, I have really good piano plugins, even with those and throwing my reverb on, I managed to pull it off, but it still was like, if this was like on a Steinway, right, in a cathedral and recorded, like, come on, you know.
Well, and that's also that bit of, you know, in the MIDI world. I mean, you play piano, so you can sit there and do some parts, but there's a bit also where a lot of times you get like, I'll play something and then I'll have to go in and edit it to sort of correct my amateurish piano playing, and you're right there. I've taken away part of that human performance, and then, you know, I think there's big differences. Not only is it the samples, because I've heard brilliant parts that deliver all that same emotion off of somebody playing through, you know, some type of MIDI device, and it's great, and it still comes down to that player reacting in real time to what information is coming their way, you know, and like having that pianist and a vocalist tracking that stuff together and really feeding off of each other.
Absolutely.
And it's those almost, you know, sort of micro differences that how somebody delivered a vocal line affects how the pianist hand strikes the keys, and just that little difference in touch might make all the difference in the world. So where it's like, it's not incorrect how they did it, but it's just like you're saying, like, I don't believe it.
Yep.
You know, it's that type of stuff. And it's just those little nuances that take years and years and years of time to truly develop. I mean, there's a lot of people that do just have that natural gift.
Sure.
But even those that have that gift, it still takes all that time and the experience of just doing it, and, you know, not only in having their core technique down. So I'm not thinking about what my hands are doing. I'm not thinking about having to read the chord changes on the chart. Like, I'm simply being present in that moment, and, you know, again, playing the correct parts, but I'm letting the vibe and the spirit of the music, like, inspire me to play a certain way, you know. Yeah. No plugin is going to do that.
Exactly. And I think you're hitting it on the head, really, everything you're saying, because even Eddie says a real in-tune piano is always preferred over a MIDI. Not necessarily, however, like everything Brian was just saying.
Piano players, they are.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is like, say we have MIDI, I'm going to have to do a ton of things to get it to get it up to par. And that, like, and then there's something about the emotion or reaction from MIDI to real that doesn't translate as well, you know? Right. And so not to say you can't do it. Totally you can. Like, you know, I pull it off a lot, but I got to go throw a saturator on, so a little bit of distortion here, a lot of reverb onto this, get the early reflections and late reflections right, and that's the part where it's like taken away from the creativity. I can't just sit down and just start hammering at the keys. You know, it's all this thought process has to get involved, and to me, that's what's taken away from the creative process of it. You know,
yeah, it's you're in a way you're trying to replicate what's natural.
Exactly.
You know, and I've worked with, you know, tons of brilliant piano players, and oftentimes there's a whole, cohort of pianists that are not good with a keyboard.
Oh, 100%.
I mean, it's, I don't want to say there's a divide, but there's a pretty clear line.
There is.
And those guys that live in the middle, like they've got all the piano chops you could ever want.
Yeah.
But then they also understand, when they're sitting down on a Nord, how to get cool sounds.
Totally. Yeah. And these are two different animals. There's a keyboardist and a pianist. These are like two different animals. They totally are.
But you'll find, at least for my money, if you need a piano part, the fastest and easiest and sonically the best way of getting a great piano sound is find a great piano and have somebody play that great piano and do your best to record it well, but just get out of the way and let that great piano be the great piano that you're looking for. When you said, I want a great piano, it's like, I want a Ferrari. Well, the best way to get a Ferrari is to go get a Ferrari.
This right here, I think, is like
vegan chocolate cake.
Well, the thing
is chocolate cake.
When I finally got to experience like what recording a real piano not only sounds like, but being there for the session and how it like turns out in the process of it, like it really puts things in perspective. Like I went to Dan's and like doing that whole thing, like it opened my eyes so much. And then now I come back to my studio and I hate every piano sound I have. And don't get me wrong, like it was a great perspective to have because now I fight for that. Sure. And it's everything that I've done since then has turned out a lot better. So this is a great experience, but I can't get it out of my head. Every time I'm like grabbing a piano now, I'm like, I missed it. Just the beauty of like, first of all, it's the natural reverb that he has in that room. Oh my, like just amazing. Right. And then there's something to be said about an instrument being recorded with a microphone versus MIDI. There's just something to be said for that. Like the microphone gives it a character. It's a whole other part to the instrument.
And it's the air between the instrument and the capsule.
Exactly.
And how, you get, and again, they're great piano models that are out there.
Totally.
It's just like if you've ever, gone to a grand piano and, you put it on the short stick or you put it, open the lid on the tall and you kind of just stick your head in there when somebody's playing. Like there's so much going on. There is a time lag of when somebody hits a damper pedal and still there's resonance happening. Even though you're muting the strings, you still have this resonant chamber that I've muted the strings, but that doesn't stop that wave from moving around until it dissipates, outside of the instrument itself, and that's just like, again, that's like that its own, it's not white noise, but, to have a comparison, it's like the instrument's white noise. It's the same thing like around a drum kit. It's all this other stuff. It's the interaction of it. It's like when I'm hitting the kick drum, I hear the floor tom resonating. And, you might hear like certain vibrations will actually move cymbals. Have you ever worked with this is an odd question. It's like, have you ever worked with an actual acoustic gong?
No, I have not.
So the gong, gong show, it's a huge chunk of metal. And when you hit it, it takes a bit of time for that energy to go through that thick piece of metal, and then it expands. So you have to, they call it warming it up. You'll see an orchestral player kind of tapping around it to get it to start to vibrate. So then when you strike it for wherever it's written in the score, then it comes to life. And especially on an acoustic drum set, like you'll hear that, to where we try to isolate so many things off that, which is a sound and it's a style, and it's also it's a very viable way of doing some things. But like if I've got a wide open kit, I know that actually that floor tom is going to speak just this much more quickly when I'm allowing it to resonate and already sort of be in motion than if everything is super dampened and super isolated and all this kind of thing. It just, again, that's just the instrument. That's how it's supposed to sound.
Dude, how cool. Now I got to get a gong. Like, that's something I've never recorded. Now you got me thinking. I'm like, that would be super cool to have one just to like. Christian, man, it's so good to see you. How are you, man?
What's up, like?
Long time no see. How are you guys?
Right. How's the studio going, man?
Finished.
Finished?
Yeah.
Are you going to give us a tour?
Sometime, but not today. So I have a busy day
It's
today.
all shut down. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I just
But finished.
answer Eddie real quick. There's almost everything transient.
yeah,
But I think kind of the way that we're thinking of transient, like a gong has a very slow, rounded
yeah, super
transient.
round.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it doesn't have a lot of attack. It just has, this kind of like fiery explosion of sound and a lot of like low end roar. But yeah, I mean, it's just it's just the nature of, the instrument itself. Like it just has to already be vibrating in order to speak, more time, especially if there's, you're largely going to find it in orchestral stuff, or you're doing some kind of like score for film. And if somebody's playing the actual gong itself, like it'll be like, it just takes, so in order to have that sound come out in time as it was written, you gotta prep it.
so you're playing like a beat before or whatever. I guess.
Yeah,
whatever.
even like you'll be, if you're a percussionist in an orchestra, like when that part's coming up, and they're already over at the gong a bar ahead of time, just like tapping really lightly around to get it to start. Yeah, pre-delay
gong issues.
that's 100% for real. But I mean, as a concept, that's the same way it is for almost every acoustic instrument. It has a certain response time that you just have to, be aware of. And again, as a drummer, this is one of the early things when people would be going to like an electric kit, which it used to have, I don't want to say unusable amounts of like lag from the triggering, but you would really have to like think about playing in front of the beat to get those old pads to be sensitive enough and then expand enough. And then it goes through the cabling, through the little piezo pickup, through the cabling to the brain, to the output, to wherever you're going. It's like you'd have to really play on the front side of things.
Hey, John.
What's up, John?
Hey guys,
Hey,
I was just dropping my kid off at school, so I'll get on video momentarily.
Okay, perfect.
We
Glad
got
to
to
have
talk
you.
about some
Hey,
Bee Gees tracks.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to mention, because you guys are talking about gongs, that in the B-52's Rock Lobster, there's this breakdown section in the middle, and they hit this huge gong, right? There's a little, you probably know that part. But in the actual track, you can hear that they pitched down that gong little by little towards the end. The tone of it actually goes down. So they had to like Vera speed that on the tape machine.
Interesting.
Cool.
How interesting is that? Oh, that's my alarm. Oh, hold on.
Yeah. There's a...
Yeah, that's... Sorry about that.
My cat was like, "What's going on here?"
Sorry about that.
In the percussion world, like you'll see there's actually tuned gongs that are out there that especially Paiste is one of the big gong makers, and you can get specific pitched gongs. There's like the Asian gamelan style, and that has a ton of these different sort of gong and gong-like things. Sometimes like the gongs are only this big, And if you start going through like, it's always like in the world music sample section, especially like with some older models and stuff. But yeah, you'll find all these different metal type of sounds that are like ping pong, brr, brr, and those are all like sort of samples or sound designs to emulate what those little pitched gong things are. But yeah, we've gonged it for sure. We went off the rails.
I think that's super cool you brought that up though, John, because like I think that's like stuff from like back in the day that just added so much character in records that we might be missing that element today, with a lot of our stuff. And it's always stuff to think about, and I think important things to talk about. That's why I love your videos, by the way, John, because you do these beautiful breakdowns and what they used to do this and how they did this, and it's super cool.
Well, thank you. I hopefully it comes true, but one of the things I focus on is making an appeal to these classic tracks, especially for younger people that haven't heard them a million times, because being an older guy, I never want to come across as like, oh, music was so much better when in the 60s and the 70s and 80s. And it's not that it's better, it's that these tracks were great, and here's why they were great. Like, that's more my attitude. And I think that comes across because, yeah, I think a lot of music in the mainstream these days is pretty bad. But that doesn't mean great music isn't being made. It's just a different music. It's just a different music industry now, more than it ever was. So you have to really search to find great music. You're just not going to, hear it on the radio like you used to,
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think, John, what is so really invaluable, and like you are doing such a tremendous service to.
Oh, that means thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, it's like I mean, I've been doing this a long time. We're probably close to the same age, but it's like I'm still learning stuff by getting access to some of those isolated tracks. And one of the things that you were just talking about, like, this sort of over-processed aspect and trying to denoise everything, when a lot of times part of that is I mean, how many things have you, like, pull some Zeppelin multi-tracks up, and you're getting, like, part of the guitar sound is a little bit of that amp bleed into the drum mics, and a little bit
absolutely
of the sound is a little bit of the bleed into the guitar mic. And again, we try to have isolation so I can turn up the guitar without turning up the drums, but like part of how that stuff works, even headphone bleed on vocal tracks. Like sometimes it's a thing, and it would have been fine by itself. And maybe if somebody was wearing in-ears, it's like I've seen some people that track vocals with actual in-ears on, and it's a different animal. But yeah, just like you get that thing that just, it's not even by design. And I think that's what so much of our talk of, we never had to deal, like, one of the things we were talking about earlier is like, you never have to deal with saturation in the past because everything already had it, and you weren't even going for it. It was just there. And it's the same kind of deal. Like, I wasn't going for a vocal sound with headphone bleed. It just happened to be there, and I had to sort of make it work. And it turns out that, it was kind of cool, and it did a thing.
It's funny you mentioned the saturation. It's like at some point, because my short story history is I started as a professional drummer. I was the guy that would show up in a studio with my drums and be amazed at the engineers and producers that did their thing, but I didn't know anything very much except some vague ideas of how music was recorded and what a recording engineer did and what these microphones were and what the difference between a condenser and a tube mic. Like, I didn't know any of that stuff. And it's amazing when I started to learn. And right when you become an engineer or you start recording, you start listening to music you've heard all your life in a new way. And at some point I realized, and this was a big thing I think that people don't talk enough about these classic recordings, because like you just said, every stage, right? These classic tracks, they were recorded, they were coming through a console, right? So at that basic stage, it's going through analog and all the components. Then it hits tape, right? So that's another analog stage. And then you're mixing, so you're playing the tape. That's going back into the console, getting a little bit of analog love. And then when you mix, it goes yet to another tape, and then you master. Like there's all these successive stages of, analog saturation, compression, however you want to describe it, that just is part of the sound. And all of those things are completely absent from modern digital recording, when people are recording into laptops. So like when I realized that, I was like, oh, that makes sense, because you don't really think about it. When you're listening to music, you just know it has a certain sound. But as you start to learn about recording studios and the history of some of these older, the way that music was listened to, it's like, oh, that makes sense. No wonder it's so hard to try to make things sound like that, because every successive stage it was recorded or printed like that.
You think about, just you're talking about like that analog chain, and you say like, hitting the tape deck. Like on a multi-track open reel recorder, there are multiple stages of its own analog thing. I mean, it's going through a line amplifier. You've got the tape itself, the type of tape, that's being magnetized. You've got it's hitting, the record head. That's another spot. And then maybe you're listening off the repro head. That's hitting another spot. The thing itself makes noise, like the faster you're spinning the tape, like you're hearing less of that noise, like, and then it's going through its own, another output circuit to go back through, to go into some other line input to mix on the console. I mean, you're not even just getting one aspect of analog. It's probably hitting 4 or 5 different pieces that are just on that device itself that are hitting, multiple stages. And it's like, even like, I've of all the tape plugins, like I really like the UA Studer one. I think that kind of does a thing.
Yeah.
But it's still, it does a thing well enough that I'm satisfied, but it's still not the same.
I agree.
What I would say is that what you might be missing off that plug version from a Realtek opener, like at least it's consistent. Because I mean, John, like I'm sure you've mixed stuff back in the day where, you've got a bunch of analog gear and outboard gear, and you'll play the thing through, even if it's say you're going off ADAT or you're, through a DAW through analog gear, depending upon the time of day and how warm that gear is, like the mix can sound relatively the same, but it's gonna feel different. It gets the heat, on a 41176 is stacked in a rack, with no ventilation. That affects how those pieces of gear respond.
Yeah, not only that, people don't, at least I don't hear enough people talking about, as gear ages, whether it's like 1176 or a U87, whatever it happens to be, a microphone or a piece of gear, that age affects how that unit or that microphone sounds too. So it's not like any two U87s from the 70s are going to sound exactly the same, right? Like no two 1176s that are 30 years old are going to sound exactly the same, because it's like a classic car, right? Like you don't just buy a classic car and you start it up and you drive it forever. You have to keep working on it because things will fail on it. You have to update components, and it's just interesting, right? Like these things kind of develop their own personality and sound characteristics over time.
Sure. And some people will go off and try to fix all that.
Right.
And to restore it back to sort of like factory new. And, at times, one of the studios that I was at, had with 6 E-Series 1176s, and they all sounded different. And some of them were just like, as one of them was the first one that got bought. So the capacitors start, failing a little bit. And it's not that it's not doing its thing and not compressing. It's just, it's reacting differently than the other one. So like, rather than going and fixing it, sometimes like No, that's the darker U87, or that's the brighter 67. You just unless you're like, oh, I got to have a pristine, stereo recording, you need a matched pair. But sometimes that's cool, when it starts to be a little bit different. It's like,
it's funny, Brian. Who's one of my favorite guys in all this stuff we're talking about. I've seen many interviews with him, and in one he was talking about his DX7s because he's back in the late '80s he was known as manipulating DX7 and through eventide harmonizers and just creating these very ethereal sounds. And he talked about his DX7s like one would they would start to just act funky, like things would work in a weird way, things would break down. And he said he had to like send one in for something else, but had a note to the tech like fix this, but please don't fix this. Like he knew as things were breaking down, like, okay, this is acting or sounding in a different way because it's kind of broken, but don't fix that. Fix this thing. That really needs to be. I just thought that was hilarious. He sent in a note of what to fix and what not to fix on his broken DX7.
We don't want a full factory reset. I just want to make sure the C5 key plays.
Exactly.
I had a quick question for you, Chris. Like, as you've got, you're deep into the synth world, and we were talking earlier about just the recording the MIDI versus reamping MIDI, to try to get a little bit more life and character in it. I mean, is that something that you're doing a lot? Especially, I mean, you do a lot of EDM stuff and really heavy synth-based stuff. Like, what's your process for making those samples sound more alive?
I started recording directly to the preamps of the Apollo unit, the synths. So it was pushed over MIDI, but I recorded audio over the preamps. And after I saw Rob's lives, so podcast and his live on TikTok, I saw the Big Six working his magic. So I got the same unit, and now all my synths are routed through the Big Six. So they're coming directly in the Big Six, and Big Six is feeding them directly into the Mac, so into the DAW. I'm not pushing the audio from Big Six again into Apollo to convert it again. I'm leaving it all on the Big Six size, so to get that SSL character into the DAW. And since each channel strip of the Big Six has its own uniqueness, so to speak, then it means also each synth that I've got has its own channel strip. Right. The only channel strip that I have patch paid is the last stereo channel. I think that's the 1011 on the Big Six. I patched paid that channel because I have more synths than channels on the Big Six. And on that channel, I have the Korg M1, the original Korg M1 from the 80s. I got it from someone who played in the band. It's right there, the Korg M1. It's a very good shape, considering he's the first owner and he pretty toured with it. And I must say I also have the plugin, the Korg M1 plugin, but it doesn't sound the same. Does the plugin sound more cleaner? Yes. But do I like more the Korg M1 with his imperfection? Definitely. So I think that's the case in general. I think everybody who's listening to the music, like Jon said, in the 60s, 70s, everybody's looking back to the imperfections which were back then, because now everything is pretty much clean. And I think the biggest difference is in production is not the production itself, because I think everybody has access to the same tools, same plugins. I think something that stands out or makes you little different, or you have a signature sound as a mixing engineer or as a producer. So as a producer is the recording part, and the mixing engineer is the gear that you're using to mix the stuff. That's the uniqueness for everyone. So, and if you look at on YouTube, on every mixing engineer out there, everyone is trying to bring his signature sound, combining different types of analog gear. So you don't see a lot of plugins in there. And so production-wise, I said that earlier this year also to Rob. Now everybody's using VST. I also used VSTs or used in the past, but as I bought more and more synths, I'm relying completely on the gear, and it sounds different. So it doesn't. So for me, it sounds better, but different if you're trying to be objective. So you can hear that analog sound, and by analog sound, I mean when you're recording a synth like a Prophet or a Minimoog directly from the original Minimoog into your DAW through a console, it sounds already done. So you don't need to go and EQ it. If you're using a plugin, you need to EQ it and to work on it to sound good. So it's mix ready, so to speak. That's my personal opinion or what I found out until now. So if I'm recording, analog gear is already sounding perfect. It's just a matter of controlling it. Because, for example, when I put a Minimoog into a mix, it cuts through like butter. So I need to control it. That's the only thing, but you don't need to EQ it. Probably a little bit compress it, but the channel strip does the magic, and that's it.
John, you were talking about the DX7 stuff that's there, and you think about it, to what Chris was just saying about now it's sort of like you're trying to, how do I distinguish myself in this dense industry? I mean, you remember like back when the GX7 came out, it's the same thing with that. When the Motif came out, the
D50,
any of those things, you heard the DX7 on every 80s ballad that was out there. And it was like, then it became the sound. And now it's the same kind of thing, like the AVA2 and those kind of plugs that are out there. Okay, now we're hearing those same sounds. Everybody's using the same stuff. And again, so it's like kind of bringing back a DX. That's not a common sound you would hear today. A real Moog, you're not going to necessarily hear that, or a Prophet, And it's like, oh, that's cool. That seems like it's a new sound, but it just new, if you're taking a 5-year snapshot of those sonic things. And same kind of thing with like drums. You go through all these different phases, and like, or guitars the same way. And it was like Strat, Les Paul, Telecaster, through a twin or a plexi or something like that, or a Vox. And then we shifted away from that. And now you're bringing back some of these older instruments, and you're like, oh, what's that crazy guitar sound? I'm like, that's a Les Paul through a Marshall, And just like,
well, the other thing, and I think that Chris could attest to this too, is that when you're talking about recording like analog synths, like through the analog domain, a lot of people that do that, especially like I liked a lot of electronica in the 90s, bands like Grid and The Orb and Aphex Twin and where back then they were still recording synthesized electronica music on tape. And not only was it like what Chris is talking about, like the analog signal itself, but I think anyone that has and creates really good electronica music has a sense of arrangement of those electronic sounds, because that's your world, right? And I think this is the thing, at least I try to do in my content, is to emphasize to younger people especially this idea of, it's not so much what sounds you use, or do you use this plugin to simulate analog, like at sort of a root production level, does your song have a good arrangement? Because I've found, for instance, when younger people are trying to do synth tracks, somebody will bring in a track, for me to work on or mix or whatever, and I'll look and they have like 5 synths in their session, all playing the same part that they printed from the same MIDI track, and I'll ask them, because I've learned to be diplomatic in the studio, right? Like I think anybody that has had any success working with people in the studio, you can't come across as like, you have to adapt, you have to be diplomatic. So I'm always genuine about it. And they say basically the same thing, like, well, I had this sound in my head and I couldn't quite do it, so I got these 6 synthesizer tracks, and that's pretty close. And what they ended up doing was they created kind of a messy, like cloudy sound out of 6 synthesizer tracks. Whereas if someone like Chris or, you know, any of you guys that do this sort of thing, you know actually how to craft a sound from the get-go that makes it like that does what you hear in your head. Now that's no fault to them. They're trying to figure out how to get the sound in their head on like virtual synths and things. But this is actually a kind of an issue where they're trying to compensate for the lack of being able to produce the sound that they hear in their head, and not thinking about the arrangement of the song as a whole, right? Like I love to just point out in some of these classic tracks that, you know, the trumpet doesn't play the whole song. It's almost like old big band and swing music. Like you might have a 30-piece big band, but if you look at the chart, the master chart, it's like, yeah, sure, the drums and the bass, they're going to be playing the whole time. But look at the horn section. They're playing a few stabs in the verse. Maybe they've got a few lines in the chorus, but there's an arrangement to every single instrument, because if every person in a 30-piece big band played their instrument for the whole song, it would sound like absolute garbage. And this is something I think that, like I said, young people especially, I feel like if they would just give a little bit of time to thinking about that, or just being aware of this thing called arranging, because to me, producing and arranging, there's like an equal sign. Like they're both the same thing. Like we talk about producing sound and recording and engineering, but when it comes to actually producing a track, I really feel the best songs, like a Steely Dan track, for example, that's like my default example. Like they had charts. People love Steely Dan music. And not only is it really well recorded and well performed, but again, underneath both those things is the arrangements of those Steely Dan tracks, like the classic ones from Asia and, you know, Gaucho, right? Like they had everything written out. They had in their head, they knew guitar voicings, piano voicings, horn parts. They had all that stuff figured out before the musicians even walked in. Like that's the extreme shining example of an arrangement.
You know, I wanted to like kind of segue from this too, because Raw and myself, we do more hip hop than anything. And oftentimes, like, we're doing a lot of MIDI stuff and virtual instruments and so on and so forth. And I caught wind of Raw maybe about a year ago. I think I started following you. And he goes live and, you know, he does a radio show, but also does a lot of mixing. And the one thing I loved about you is how he would take the concept of, you know, going back when you talked about you go from tape, you know, go from console to tape. And he creates this process in Luna and goes with the idea of like, okay, we're going to run through tape first. And he utilizes it just like he's in a console, but he's doing it in the virtual world. Man, you sound just like it's analog, and you do just such a great job with it. I think people could learn a lot from you. You know,
shit, that is the best thing going, man. Ever since I started using Luna, ever since the pandemic. You know, right when they came out during the pandemic. You know, I'm a Pro Tools user. You know, Pro Tools all my life, but I tested out there. I was in the house like everybody else during the pandemic. I really test this thing on out. You know, and I ran through it a couple of times, and I was like, hold on, this shit sounds pretty good. Yeah, hold on, hold on. I kept going back and forth with my Pro Tools, and it took me about a month and a half. And I just said, bump it, I'm going into Luna, man. I've been Luna for about 4 years now. So all my mixing is in the box. I don't use no outboard gear. Only outboard gear I'm using is going in, you know, for recording vocals. That's mostly what I record is vocals. So most of my stuff is made straight analog. I got my analog system. I got sound modules. I don't even use VSTs. So I'm still old school.
Hey, Ra, I have a question for you. Is Luna, like I have the UAD stuff, and I turned it on once and just, yeah, you know, it's cool, but learning another DAW besides Pro Tools. Easy. But I'm just curious, is that an emulation? Does it have like console emulation built into it? Is that yeah. So it's kind of like Mixbus. Like I bought Mixbus a few years back, I think when they were first starting, and I was amazed at how good it sounded. It sounds like it's a similar thing.
Hey, this is what a lot of people are doing right now. They're mixing in Pro Tools, right? And then they're taking their stems and running them through Luna.
Oh, interesting.
That's what I started doing first. And I was like, I'm going to stay in Pro Tools because I know it so much and mix. And then I'm going to run. I liked the sound quality of Luna, and I run my stems through Luna. And I just got tired of doing that. One day I said, man, let me just record in Luna. I keep bouncing around, man. I can do the same thing inside here.
So when you record in the Luna, can you emulate the like?
Yeah, it's just like using the console.
Okay, yeah.
It's just like using the console without having to open the console. It's just like using the console. You know,
I've done a couple of records in Luna and in Mixbus, and I've done one where I fully tracked it into Luna back when I had a bunch of UA gear. That is one of the things that on the tracking side, you do need to be like, I think to get the full benefit. And I'm not even sure if you can. I think now with some of the updates, you can track without like actual UA gear, but you're not going to get the benefit of the tracking side of Luna unless you're in the UA ecosystem.
Exactly. Exactly.
It integrates.
You got to have an interface. You got to have an interface.
Yeah, it integrates directly. Basically, console, that UA app is built into Luna, so you can do all the same things. Like you can have the DSP running plugin, emulation on the way in, and then feeding the near zero latency headphone mixes through all those plugins. You can have that happening in Luna. It was great, and I still like. I think maybe it's just I've done so much tracking in my life, like through Pro Tools, but I'll do the same thing. I'll track in Pro Tools to be fast, and then going into either Mixbus, because Mixbus does the Harrison emulation, and now they do on the EQ section, you can do the 32C or you can do a 9000J EQ, since the SSL, whatever, in the parent company absorbed Harrison. But on the Luna side, you can do whatever UA plugins on the channels, but then on the bus side, you can either do Neve busing or API busing.
API. I use the API on the drums. I use the Neve on my sounds. The API
and you can mix
on the
and
drums
match.
sound crazy good.
So you guys are confirming what the little transformation I did a few years back. Like during pandemic, I had to upgrade my studio because I had an old Mac Pro, and I ended up having to. It was one of those things. You guys know this, right? For those of us who've been doing digital recording for a while, I literally had to buy a whole new studio. Like I had to buy a new interface, a new computer. And I decided to get the Apollo X 8P, which is my interface as of late. And I have analog channels. I have API channels and universal audio channels that I've typically used, especially to record drums with projects for people. And I read about the Unison, right? Like I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. But I didn't really know how good that might be. I just was like, oh, that'll be cool. When I need extra channels, I can use the Unison. That sounds pretty good. But as soon as I started recording with them, I was like just turning around, like, is this sound as good as I think it does? I recorded some drums for a couple of producer friends of mine, not telling them that I was using the UA Unisons, right? Like I was using like API on snare pretty much, or no, API on kick, like the 1073 on snare. I mean, I was just shocked. And the friends of mine that I sent the tracks to, they're like, man, the drums sound great, and then I told them. So I guess I bring this up, like, how lucky are we? Like, yes, there's still frustrating things, but this is no longer like 2007 when Waves put out like an API emulation, like that. I think
it was $2,000.
I think that tainted my view of this whole use Unison. Like it's a whole different ball game now. And how lucky are we to be able to harness that, because it does sound incredible. These emulations.
The best part about that Unison thing for me is I do a lot of mobile recording, right? So
it's great for that.
I have a vocal chain that's so masterful in there. They'd be like, "Damn, how did you record this here in this little room?"
Well,
It's
you know,
just
the thing is
it's the
this,
Apollo vocal chain I got going into Unisys, it's crazy, you know what I mean? So I done perfected it so good that it just sounds perfect. I don't even gotta do nothing to record.
this is why I want to highlight this too, because like most people, you know, we're in our laptops with the interface these days.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
a great idea is to get Mixbus or Luna.
Yep.
These are emulators, and they actually sound really close to like a
I'm
real
gonna try
thing.
that mix. I've tried Mixbus out once, but I never really dug into it. Because, you know, I was already using Luna. I was just stay with Luna. But I tried it for a second. Man, you know, learning curve. I don't feel like learning. And, you know, you get stuck for a second. You want to go right back to what you know.
I'll tell you, comparing Luna to Mixbus, I think the learning curve is faster on Luna. There's a lot of the same shortcuts as Pro Tools. Mixbus takes a little bit more time to just. It's like
That's
anything.
why. That's what happened to me. I was on it and I was like, what am I doing? What am I doing?
Go to any
Right back to
console
Luna.
and make a record on any console or mix a live show. Sometimes you need to know where the button is. For
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah, I don't know what the button is. I get mad. I get frustrated quick.
I'll tell you something, John, that's especially as you know, I think we have very similar backstories. Like I started off and still am a drummer, and it's the same thing of like I was doing all these sessions for other people and like
What's up?
how does all the studio stuff work? And then I just started sort of my journey, you know, like almost 30 years ago, like learning the complete side of the recording. But something that Mixbus does is you can sit there and take all of your drum tracks, and they've got it's built on it's like Ardor, which I think is like what Reaper is built on. And there's a lot of open source stuff with it, but they have a very special thing, and it's their polarity optimizer. So I can sit there and take 16 channels of drums, you know, find a loud section, and you just, you know, highlight that and run the polarity optimizer, and it'll tell you, and it's just doing all this calculation to like how much gain you're getting in low end gain, and it'll say, you know, flip the phase on left overhead. I should not flip the phase. That's our phase and polarity, right? you're changing polarity on this overhead. You know, this, you know, tom number 2, and it just does this analysis that you would have to sit there for hours, you know, playing like button configuration of how do I like get the best phase core or, you know, cohesion on there, and it just does that, and that's great. And it's the same kind of thing. Like what I noticed on the first record I did through Mixbus, again, like, everything was recorded really well, and then I just loaded up the tracks in Mixbus, put it up at Unity, and I'm like, oh, this already kind of sounds like a record, you know. And it was just going through the left right before you even started like grouping things down. And Luna was the same way, you know. Luna, you have to make a few more selections which is great because they're giving you those options of like, what do you want? Do you want the Neve summing, or do you want the API? They're never going to get SSL.
No,
because now SSL owns Harrison.
Yeah, they're making their own.
I'm guessing that eventually, and SSL probably won't come up with their own DAW. They'll integrate something on.
I think they're coming with their own DAW.
I think.
You think so? Yeah. I mean, if it were me, I would take that Harrison DAW. And then again, like you've got some SSL options now on the channels. I would imagine they're like, cool, we can now make this an SSL desk, or we can make it a Harrison, or some mixture of the two. You know? But yeah, it's cool. It's certainly worth.
And I sure do wish the SSL would come to the to UAD. I've been waiting on that.
I have UAD as well as SSL, and on the SSL side, beside the big 6 that I own, analog wise, I also use the plugin mixer. I think Brian also has the same thing because I'm using it with UFA, and you have the same analog mixing feeling that you have in UAD Luna. So it's just SSL.
Yeah.
And I use SSL on everything that I create. The only difference is the API on the drums. And since I don't own a analog API, which is on my wish list, of course, I use Tegler Cream. And I can only recommend that to you. I'm not sure if everybody knows about Tegler. It's a German company. based in Berlin, but they're doing some great stuff analog-wise.
Interesting.
Never heard of that one.
Me neither.
I was just looking through mics and stuff today, and actually, picked this guy up recently, the 201, the biodynamic 201. Like, I gotta give it to you. Like, in
I didn't even know biodynamic make
they
mics.
know how to make gear, man. They know how to make mics. Like, I've got a ton of Sennheiser stuff, and
I didn't know they made mics.
wires and all that stuff. Like, man, they just make good gear.
I love their headphones.
AKG, great stuff. Good job, guys. Good job, Germans.
Also, ODs makes great headphones, so I'm a big fan of ODs. So tracking, I always do with Biodynamics Close One, but when it starts mixing, I always start with the ODs one, LCDX. But now I got a pair of Genelecs, the 41s, and they blew me away. I'm not thinking of changing anytime soon. They
Found what
sound,
you was looking for.
Well,
yeah.
when you
So
find it,
I
it
cannot,
works. Stay with it.
they sound so, and with the correction DSP on them, I can only,
I haven't
it feels
seen
like
the
I'm
correction
hearing for the first time in my life how the tracks sound. So
I need to do the
Yeah.
correction on mine.
Do you use
You know the new UAD. They got sound correction on the new monitor on the new interface now.
yeah.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it sound like
They got sound correction on it now.
So you need to buy the SonarWorks add-on, which costs you, I think, as an
SonarWorks
existing
is
customer,
integrated with it.
$50 or something like that.
Yeah, they're integrated.
So, but they can only integrate. So in UAD, I tested it. So in UAD, you have the monitoring, the usual monitors that you have, the output, and you can also use channel 3 and 4 or 1 and 2 as alternative output, right? So you can have your main monitors and a second pair of monitors. If you apply the SonarWorks, it can only be applied to your main monitors. So if you have an alternatives ones and want to flip between them, you can't. You need always to go back to SonarWorks and you need to manually change the output. So it only applies to your main monitors.
But that's the main thing I would want it for, really, though. Just the main monitors, and then like my other monitors, I would want to hear something different to make sure I'm not full of myself.
No, I mean the correction. The correction. You can only apply it to your main monitor. You
Yeah,
cannot
that's what I'm
apply the
saying. I
correction.
want it to be only on the
Okay.
main ones, and then I can listen back and see what it's really doing. You know, on my other ones. You know, because I know my other ones. But when I hit that correction, I want to know what it's doing. And if I hit that correction, and I don't really hear no difference in my main monitors or shit. I mean, my other monitors, it ain't really doing nothing for me.
I will say, like, I bought SonarWorks Sound ID like 4 years ago. And at first, I had, you get the placebo effect, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? And I started to question it, and I had to remeasure again, and it gave me all new measurements, and I'm like, why did it do that? These are like totally different. And then I did it again for a third time and got a third measurement that was totally different. And I started to question how accurate it was. I'm not sure. Maybe they updated it, but I was like, I'm not
I'm the
using it.
same way with you, man. I've never used. I did that before in one of my studios, and like you said, it kept saying something different every time. I'm like, what is the? How is it different?
Makes sense.
The room ain't changing. Nothing's changing in there. How come I'm getting different readings?
I think it's because it's how you're holding the mic, because
that's exactly what
it's
it is.
measuring like 36 or 38 points. So it
Man,
means
that's-
38 times you're not going to be at the same spot, in the sweet spot, because you have a range. So also the measure has a range to it, right? When I do the same thing with the Genelecs, it only has one single point, and you put it in one single point, and that's basically it. But that also differs a little bit if I'm moving now a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. So
I
it's
think
not
Chris is right. Like I have it as well. I haven't installed it or done it just because my understanding of it is you have to have the plugin on your master bus basically at all times to have it work. And like it seems a little more complicated. It seems like a commitment to doing that.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, and have any of you done two measurements not even touching the mic. Like do it one time and then do it again and see if it's the same. Because I think what Chris is saying is right. Like we all know this with, especially recording drums. I can move my like Beta 52 inside the kick drum, just nudge it just a little bit, and it can sound pretty dramatic, in terms of the difference in sound. So these, even though you might think like you did it 6 months ago and here it is, like if it's fractionally off, I would imagine you would get, exponentially, different results. That totally makes sense to me.
So I will say this, because I think y'all are exactly right. However, I did do it with this for 2 measurements and left it exactly the same, and it still gave me. So I just had like, you know what I mean? So I set, it wasn't this microphone, but I just put the microphone on here, right? Put this up to the speaker, put it in the desired spot and left it there, right? Marked my spots on both sides, did my measurements, and I still got 2 different measurements.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, what could that possibly be?
Yeah.
Wind in the room.
I know, like, it's like, what?
Where
and
were
so,
you
'cause I
standing?
totally had that
Where
hunch.
were you standing in the room? That's the next question, because
that's
the
the thing.
sound goes like, it goes in waves, like circles. So
That
depends
could be
where
it.
you were in the room at the same
Supposed to be
time.
in your
That could
mixed
be it.
space. Supposed to be in your mixed space.
Yeah, but even if you have like, even if you moved your little Star Wars figure, or whatever a little bit, like something like that, something I think minuscule that you would think, oh, that has nothing. Like it could be that it's so scientific that it literally will account for every little thing that's bouncing sound around, right down to a Star Wars action figure. I don't know. I'm just kind of guessing.
Yeah, I think y'all are right. And like, that's where I just questioned it. I was like, you know what? I'm just going back to like what I already trust.
Yeah.
I just didn't trust it. And that's what it was. Because I couldn't really answer.
I'm not a fan of the music, of the sonar, of the correction either, though. I learned my speakers. I learned my room. I learned it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I learned it, and I don't want to be fooled.
I think that's
Don't
most
fool
important,
me.
right? You spend a lot of time with your monitors. You listen to pro
I know
mixes. You
exactly
listen
what
to
they
your
sound
mixes.
like. I know what music sounds like coming out of them. I know what my favorite mix sounds like coming out of it. So hey, that's all I need. I don't need no room correction, man. I think when I put that stuff on there, I didn't like it. I didn't like the way it sounded in my room. I just didn't like it. I was like, man, this just doesn't sound authentic no more.
Feel right. Yep.
Yeah, it didn't feel right.
And I think the thing too is it's like no matter any of our mix environments, they're probably sounding pretty good. It's not like you're in a small 6-foot cubicle inside of a closet. Like, everyone has a pretty decent, treated mixing room. It may not be perfect or whatever, but I think that if it was a really awful mixing room, yeah, you'd need something like that. But I would imagine any kind of project studio, that sounds halfway decent. And if you don't have just really offending mirrors or just crap in your room, it's going to sound decent, and you can learn how to adapt your mixes to sound better elsewhere because of maybe you don't have the great bass response in your setup, so you make adjustments like like you were saying, you learn how to mix with what you have.
Mm-hmm.
No,
I think that's also the biggest problem in treatment is controlling your bass, controlling your frequency somewhere around 100 hertz. Yep. That's where my issues are, and I checked a lot of people who are doing measurements in their studios. Everybody's struggling with that 100 hertz plus minus 50, where they are struggling to control it. And when I treated my room, I was so happy with the new treatment, and I thought it's gonna be pretty flat. No way! On 100 hertz, I have a boost of 10 dBs, and I was like, what?
Yeah, because you put some stuff boosts and some don't. Well, hey, I'm gonna tell y'all this right here. When I'm on my mobile recordings and there's not a good room where I'm at, I use these right here. These work pretty damn good.
I get asked about those a lot. So you like them?
I like them for mobile recording. Now, I'm not going to sit in here and mix on them.
Sure.
I'm going to usually pull my studio. But if I'm on a mobile recording and the room sounds bad or anything, and I want to get the mix to sound decent before I leave, I'll throw these on, man, and put it on a cool flat room in there, and then I'll just mix from there and there. And it sounds good, but I'm amazed how good it sounds coming out of there. And it gives me a good solid lock in. It's like I'm in the studio. It's not like I'm in their room no more, you know. So I like that.
I was going to show you like this guy here. This is the microphone.
What the hell?
It's for I've got the Trinov system.
He's got the real software.
Yeah, and it is like there's a monster difference in a Trinov versus like a Sound ID, and Sound ID can still be cool, but this is using like 4 Omni capsules, and you place it exactly at your head level in your mix position.
Yeah.
So it's taking, and then you just walk away from it. So you're never dealing with like, well, it's an Omni capsule, but it still has an off-axis response. And if you're looking here versus, a little tiny hand flick, or you're kind of shaking your hand as it's doing a measurement. But this, like, through the Trinov, it'll take not only just the frequency response, it's measuring the left and right, but it's also measuring your vertical. And I told Rob a long time ago, like, my floor isn't 100% level, and you could see one of the monitors just slightly dipping down. On the Trinov, on the 3D, it actually recognized that one side was like a degree lower.
Wow.
So in its phase recalculation, it's compensating to bring that side up. And again, I don't have a small room, but I don't have a big room either. And just putting that in made all the, this is after I've done all my normal measurements and just trying to treat the obvious, parallel reflections and dealing with, bass trapping in the corners. And I've got, cloud overhead. I did all the things that you could do to give yourself the best starting point. But then like the having the Trinov, and again, it was an investment for sure. But the mixes that I've been doing I got it in January of this year, and I am done in at least I would say 25% earlier.
Hey, somebody said in the end, most people listen to music on a nano phone speaker. Hey, but check this out. Check this out, though. Check this out. It still got to sound good coming off that nano phone speaker. Period. It still got to sound good coming off that speaker. Even if you listen on some crappy speakers, a crappy mix is going to sound crappier on crappy speakers.
Amen.
Straight up. So even if you're listening on the smallest device, we're mixing for that small device too.
Yeah,
you see what I mean? That's how I look at it. Like, a lot of people be like, "Oh, what's the reason of doing all that mixing? We're only going to listen to it on this little device." Well,
that's why we're mixing it.
That's why we're mixing.
Yeah, and I think for people that might be watching, like, people are like, "What microphone is that?" Like, there's a lot of people who will tune into a live like this who don't have a lot of the experience that I guess all of us have, whatever, collectively. And that is just something to keep in mind, right? Like, yes, on one extreme is like, we're talking about reference microphones and tuning speakers and treating rooms. And a lot of that stuff is out of the, is out of, out of the reach of a lot of, home laptop people. And then the other extreme is like, yeah, well, I mean, everybody listens to everything on a iPhone speaker, myself included. Like, but it's somewhere striking a balance, right? Because I think when someone doesn't pay attention to the quality of what they're doing, will create crappy sounding tracks or crappy mixes. But somebody that is paying too much attention to the technical side of things, we can go off the deep end and just spend 3 weeks mixing a track, and maybe that lasts like 2-3%. Really doesn't make that much of a difference. Like, we want to think that it does, but it's true.
It does.
Yeah, but you know what I'm saying. There's it's striking a balance, and this is, I think, a really important thing, especially for younger people who or people that are new to recording, because they'll hear experts talk about these details, and they do matter. But it's like anything you do, you have to kind of keep in check, because you don't want to spend a year working on a song. I'm working with someone that's coming in today. And literally, you guys, we've been working on this track for over a year. one song. Now, it's only been like a 4-hour session, 1 day a week, more or less. But there is a lot of, well, I think we can change the bass part, and then we'll, we worked on the bass part for one session and got it great, and signed off on it, so to speak. And then like the next week it comes in, it's like, well, I don't know. I have this idea for the bass part, and then we'll re-record the bass part, for example, and then he'll say, well, what do you think? And I just want to say, dude, we signed off on this like last week. I don't know, like, so anyhow, my point is, it's like we have to keep these things in check, because you don't want to just have a total like lackadaisical casual approach to recording, but yet you don't want to like overanalyze and get really bogged down with it. So, I think probably all of us know those two extremes, and strike a balance somewhere in the middle to just be productive and forge forward, and, and get things done, rather than spending a year on a freaking track. You know what I'm saying?
Man,
I call this the point of diminishing returns.
Yeah.
Because you get to a point where it's just like you said, we already you should have been good with that. Like, there's time you have to marry yourself to this. Do it, because otherwise, how many bass sections can you do? Try 1,000, right?
So wait a minute,
Yeah,
you're inside my brain, because that's exactly what I call it. And I'll just say this really quickly for my own work is, you start a track, like say with a cheesy organ sound, like something just out of a plugin, just to get the idea down. And then you start to build up the track, all the while thinking, okay, that organ, I'm going to replace that, with like a Hammond or a better sample library. You build up this track, and it's sounding good. Then you're like, oh yeah, I got to replace that organ. And you go back and you start going through, or at least for me, like I spent maybe 3 or 4 hours going through different organ libraries with Leslie's, only to realize that little kind of cheesier sounding organ track not only was the right track, but I had built the entire track with that in context, right? Like this was, years ago, but the point being, it's like I had to learn that sometimes that point of diminishing returns is exactly that. And unconsciously, that so-called cheesy organ part was the perfect part, right? And this is something I think we all kind of get to a point of, and then you carry that with you when you're working, like, yeah, maybe technically this isn't the best string library to use, or maybe you could have re-recorded this with an analog, whatever it happens to be. If it's working, it's working, and you don't have to feel weird about it.
Well, and to highlight this real quick, this is the part where I think an artist could really learn from, or if you're not the engineer, because if you're going back to change sounds when it's already been crafted, this could cause everything else to go haywire. And more than likely, that's what's going to happen. And so it's like, here, just switch up the like you said, the organ right here, and we're going to throw a piano. Everything else sounds off now. For that one.
But isn't that funny? Like, I had to learn that lesson myself. Totally. And, I think everybody does. But that was a kind of a big moment where I was like, I just spent 4 hours like circling back and just to like, I threw my hands up. I'm like, because in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, you can't use that cheesy organ sound. You have to, and whatever. It's like even if you record something with a crappy mic that you just use for something. I mean, how many times? And I think we've all done this. I've even had like a real prominent engineer friend of mine. It happened to him when we were recording here. We were doing some guitar overdubs, and he brought up the mic, and we're working, and he looked, and he listened, and he looked, and he goes, oh crap, that mic, it's not even pointed at the guitar cabinet. It had fallen down or whatever, like pointed at the ground. And technically it was like not the way you record guitar, but it actually sounded fine. So we've all had those moments.
Totally. Yeah, like that's what I call like bending the rules, right? Like you do have some rules, but like sometimes you can kind of walk outside them a little bit. And yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, I was I was listening to a podcast, and one of the engineers there is for a long time now in the music business. So he was doing mixing when there was tapes and consoles and all that shebang. And he had a very good point. He said, back in the old days, you had only so many track you can bounce to. So you were forced to make decision and commit
Live with
And
it.
that commitment was the education he had, right? Nowadays, you're tracking something and you're saying, well, that track doesn't sound good. I'm going to put 3 more layers, like John said, because it doesn't add up to the sound I wanted. In the past, you only had 1 track for that sound. So you really need to make sure that it sounded like you wanted on that single track. And
Get the right
so
sound from the beginning. Sound
from the
selection.
beginning, exactly. So I think that made a huge impact to everybody who started with analog in their career, because that made you understand what commitment, what's limitation in terms of tracks. You don't need 72 or 100 tracks to make a good rock song track or something like that. So that's what I'm trying to say. I made the same mistakes. I did layering, John. I also did 4 times a track just to come up with a real sound, until I did some sound design courses. So I understood, okay, sound design, how sound design is, and that's a major thing by itself. So, like the acoustic part. And regarding what Brian said on the acoustic with the Trinov, paying a 5,000 something. I'm not sure, Brian, how that one costs now, but I think it's somewhere around 4,000
Yeah,
or
it's about that.
5,000.
Hey guys,
To have
I got to
something-
jump. This has been awesome, and
Yeah, I gotta go too, y'all.
SoundMind, we should possibly figure out a time when we could all do this again, because this has been really fun for me, and we've kept a good 40 people watching like pretty much the whole time. So I think this is really, really great. You guys are all awesome.
Totally. Every Tuesday, 8 a.m.
Oh, you do?
7 a.m. for you, right? You're in California, I think. I'm pretty sure.
Awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm in California. All right, guys, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're
I'm
gonna
gonna
wrap it up
follow
too.
people
So,
on
but we'll go through a few comments, and if Brian wanted to add anything before we head out.
Yeah.
I was just wanted to say to Brian, to his wonderful mic and Trinov system, if I would buy something like that without having at least a pair of decent speakers and a treated room, I don't think it will make a big difference in the sound.
And I would tell you not to do it. Like I've got a pretty great setup, and like especially like last year I had a really good year. As far as like both on the live sound side and the recording side, and so I had a little dough left over, and I had demoed out the Trinov stuff, and I was noticing though that there was still that bit of, even in my space, as well treated as it was, and with the Focal, the trios, they're phenomenal speakers, and I don't even have like a pair of mix cubes, because they've got a focus mode that effectively gives you that mix cube thing. I was still noticing that having to go and reference in the car, listen on the home stereo, and there were things that weren't translating, and I was becoming aware, and I had a friend with a smart rig that came over, and we shot the stuff in the room. So I actually had like the FFT diagrams to come in, waterfall plots, and finding the resonances and stuff. And again, you keep treating and you keep treating. And then it was like after demoing out the Trinov, and then Will, he picked up one, and it's the same kind of deal. It's like it makes the workflow faster if you can. Once you've done everything you can through quality gear and diligent treatment, then something like that for me became a worthwhile investment. And I think the time that I've saved, again, this is not something that a new person should ever get, but it is like the other end of the extreme of like DSP based correction. It's definitely saved time and money for me, for sure. Not even John's gone, but he was bringing up that point of arrangement, and then like somebody changing a bass part or even a tone. Like that's not only just changing a part, that is literally changing the arrangement. Like,
It is. Totally.
and if I'm going between a cheesy organ and a dirty B3, playing the exact same voicings, you're still changing the harmonic arrangement.
Exactly.
So it's why it's so important of having that good arrangement coming in. And I think every good arrangement also allows some flexibility for some change to occur. But yeah, figure out what you want to do before you hit the red light, And it's the same deal. Like tracking drums, and then, oh yeah, can we make this 24-inch bass drum now sound like an 18-inch bop drum? Can we change this? Can we change that? Can we put it in a different room? Yes, you can. But God, it's so much easier to do it from the beginning. And it's like you get this bit where that lack of experience based upon it's not available to everybody today to just go to a studio. And you're talking about like you don't need all these tracks, and maybe you do, maybe you don't, but like having that limitation forced you to commit to that idea. And it just allows you to really hyper focus in on what's available and what is truly needed. And so like you don't have, and you were paying for studio time, you know, before anybody had something on a laptop, like you had to go to another facility and you're paying by the hour. Or you do these, like they used to have like the late night lockouts where you'd have like the 10 a.m. to 6 a.m. or 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., you know, session, because they're trying to like run the studio 24 hours to barely keep the lights on. You know, it's not a profitable business, but yeah, you had to figure out how to make it work. And then you really just saying like, and you don't have time or the budget to have like sort of these whimsical ideas. And like, I don't know, let's take the same MIDI part and we'll run it through 30 different, you know, VST instruments and see which one works. Like in the day, you didn't have that. And like you were talking about like mixing a record in a day. Dude, if something takes me longer than a day to come up with what I feel is a pro level mix, something's wrong. And usually it's like, okay, I got to go in and clean up a bunch of stuff that was poorly recorded. And I've got to do a bunch of fixing, or like, God, the vocals are wacky out of tune. You got to do all that stuff first. But if I get something that's good raw source material, it doesn't take any time really to come up with the mix. You know, again, no, if somebody sends me, like we were talking last week, like you sent me 20 guitar parts. Like, do you want me to use all 20?
I just need one good one.
Like, or no, they're just options. I'm like, okay, I thanks, I guess, but you know, then you're leaving it up to me to decide what's good and what's not. And my sensibilities might be like, yeah, the 12-string guitar part was really cool, and I feel like there's a great spot to feature it. And the client gets the mix back and like, yeah, I don't think I want to use the 12-string part. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, and you're so right. Like, I mean, I talk about this all the time on my channel, but
I need
like,
to jump off, guys. Sorry.
Hi, Christian. Thank you, buddy. Nice
Thank
seeing
you so
man.
much. Nice seeing you. Bye.
Like when it comes down to like when I produce my records, I really don't leave until like it already sounds mixed without me doing anything, you know? And so the sounds I'm selecting is already mixing with all the rest of the sounds. And cause you're right. Like if I'm mixing a record and it's taking me longer than a day, there's something wrong in the foundation. And so now I'm over here trying to decipher a Da Vinci code of audio, you know, and like what is wrong. And like you talked about it earlier, is like polarity and phasing.
Right.
Oh, this is like such an important tool for an engineer, and it comes from the foundation. That's the foundational work. To me, that's like editing, you know? And so you could listen and be like, that kick sounds weird. It's not pushing on the speaker right, you know? And then click that polarity and bam, there it is, you know? And like, those are the little things you go through and doing the foundational work when you're producing your records, you know, before the mix.
It's funny. Eddie's got like
he's awesome.
You get the gold star for like really relevant comments, and God bless Bill Blowers. And I've always told people like invoice accordingly. Mm-hmm. You know.
Yeah, totally.
Money.
Well, and that's like when I mix these days. You know, people always ask me my prices, and they vary because I know better now. I know like I have to listen to what I'm getting first.
Right.
You know, be right off the bat, I hear a bunch of timing issues, maybe tuning issues. And I already know that that's going to take me 4 hours to fix. You know, the mix will take me an hour, but the editing part is like super, super tedious. I've always separated the two. Like to me, mixing is like, I'm just going full in, it's ready to go, ready to start EQing and compressing. Anything,
mixing, not fixing.
totally. Yeah. If I'm doing anything else, it's editing. And so I tell people that a lot, and they'll send me records to be like, yeah, I got to edit it. They'll even tell me like everything's on time, everything's tuned, and I'll listen to it and be like, nah, it needs to be edited. In fact, the record I was talking about yesterday with the piano, right? I just couldn't I'm like, it's just not there. It's like slightly off. I nudged it by like 200 samples to the right.
Right.
And it just, bam, that's it.
Locks
it needed
in
to
the
like
pocket.
move away from the drums a little bit. And then that like beautiful round transient came right after the kick, and it just hit exactly the way I wanted. And like, those are like the little things engineers and good producers can pick up on. When we talk about 200 samples, like, come on, this is such a fat, like blink of an eye time. I'm sure, it's so fast, but this can make or break a record. It really can. It's so important.
Yeah, this is the kind of stuff also to where as somebody who mixes for a living, I'm still going to encourage non full-time mixers, like, mix your own record at home and see what you can get. But this is where the difference in somebody that sort of specializes in that, and it's not that a good mix is going to save a bad song. That never happens.
Nope.
But it's one of the things that your ears might not be as sensitive yet to those little things about doing, a 200 sample shift. Like, you're not going to perceive it as like a time domain difference, but it's your ear and that sensibility to know that clash of everything hitting right here was actually causing some strange buildup. And no matter what you did, I got to now increase the attack on the kick, or now I've got to, but just letting it do that, then all of a sudden you're like, you took what was a great performance and great sounds, and then your sensibility and your taste and experience let it become a great mix off a great song, off a great arrangement with a great performance on great instruments. Like, it's those little tiny micro details that you only learn over time.
Well, and there's,
you're on a budget, hire a pro to get it done faster. Yeah.
Well, and for like good engineers, right? They understand like the beautiful relationship in transients. There's a lot more going on, and when it comes down to mixing, but there's a relationship between all of these and how they hit. And then based on the genre and stylistic approach and emotion, this basically dictates, what is this going to be, like a sharp transient or a round or a box, and these are, to me, like the building blocks of a really good mix. And like going all the way back to what talking about soloing. This is why I don't do it that often, is because like, if I had that piano solo, it's got to be on the measure. It can't be off. But the reason why it had to be slightly off is because of the drums. Right. Now all the transients are playing. They're in relationship with each other. They're helping each other. It's a partnership, and we don't want any of them fighting. You got two brothers going at it, and it's that's the last thing you want. And little things like that, doing slight timing shifts, right? The attack and release on a compressor, transient designers, those type of things are going to be critical on how this mix translates in terms of feeling. I think transients aren't necessary. They are heard, right? But they're more felt, in my opinion.
Oh, for sure. I think that last point, and then we should probably take some questions, then kill it for the day.
Yeah.
We were talking about making things sound natural. And you think about if you were watching a rhythm section in a control room or on stage, you have a time domain difference between, let's say, the drum kit and the piano. Now, they may be playing together perfectly in time, but you think about, like, maybe if you nudge the piano earlier, probably, the piano is a little bit forward of the drums. Like, you're going to hear or perceive that instrument to not only be closer, but you're going to hear that sound earlier.
Bingo.
So like gridding everything, which is sort of like, the 2000s era, where like people were making a full-time living pocketing.
Yeah. Totally.
I did so much pocketing. It's like, that's like great, cool. That builds up your editing chops. But at the same time, it's like, man, something, again, it's that something, if you know what acoustic material sounds like, then you're like, I don't know, something's off.
Yeah, is this a robot playing this? Like, how can it be so perfect? Totally. Yeah, I totally agree. To me, it's just, these are like the most important points when it comes to really thinking about a good mix. And let's see if we had any questions.
Congratulations, resounding. Yeah.
Oh, you're graduating from Full Sail. Yeah, congrats. I don't know how to start my engineer business, but man, I can't wait. It's not necessarily a question. However, maybe we could give a couple of tips maybe for people out there that are just starting out.
Same thing, like we talked about early on. Find out where the musicians are in your region, in the town you live in, and go to their shows, build relationships with them, and then offer your services. I mean, you got to do a lot of cold calling in a way, sort of a schmoozing and rubbing elbows and that kind of thing. But, find the people that they might not even know they need you, but at least introduce yourself to them, let them know what you have available, and figure out a way to, incentivize them to utilize you. It's like, yeah, I can help your career. You need a good demo. Like, you guys are a great live band. Like, what do you have available online as samples, or, have you released anything yet? It's like, oh, we got a couple, demos we recorded in my bedroom. It's like, hey, just tell them, like, I'd love to listen to it, and then listen to it, then give them some feedback. Be like, hey, this is a great song. I think that, you've got some opportunity to take this great idea and expand it. And I've got the tools and training and expertise to make your thing better. I think that's for anybody starting, that's what I would do.
100%. I mean, I did that same approach when I first started out, and it works beautifully. And let me even stretch this perspective out, because especially when Brian and I first started out, like, internet was here, but just getting started. So it wasn't quite like this. So we were locked into the local scene. Right. And I think there's a lot of power there, right? Like, you could find all kinds of people to work with. However, there's two things you could do now instead of just one. You're not just locked into the local scene. You could also go online. And y'all already know my channel, most of you. I go live almost daily, doing mixes and talking about, my approach, teaching, so on and so forth. This debuting your work is really, really important. Showing people your skills, and so doing that in some shape or form, where you're doing before and afters online, going live, even just posting the mixes that may have just been released, which Brian does a lot. You want to do that so you're showing other musicians that might be interested in working with you, like, hey, look, this is my work, and so just finding a way to advertise your work, whether if it's local or online. I think both should probably be put into the plan, especially from the get-go.
Yeah. Tony was talking about local networking better than online. I would still probably say yes, it is, as a matter of practicality. And I know, Rob, your inbox eclipses mine, but I'm getting daily, hey, how much to mix? And I think there's a lot of, they call them in used car business, a lot of looky-loos.
Totally. Yeah.
Coming around, looking in the lot, kicking tires, never with any intention to buy. And I try to reply as much as possible. And there's some, though, that somebody will ask that question, and I'll go and look at their profile and hear what they might have on, and I'm filtering through that before I ever respond to somebody, because you just spend all day, sort of making your pitch.
Yep.
And they're never gonna commit to something.
Oh, yeah.
But if you hear, it's oh yeah, this is a really good song. And I would say the other thing is, with the online, not just demonstrating your catalog, but also just start finding people. Like I've reached out to artists that I've just like been scrolling through, and I hear something on somebody's like TikTok channel, and I'm like, oh, this is great. I'd love to work with these people. And just cold call them. You never know. I mean, I've got a bunch of mastering stuff this year that I got from people that like they had a pretty cool song, and they just did it, and they mixed it in Logic or something like that, and put it up, and like for TikTok, that's fine. But like, you finding those artists that are out there, and reach out to people that you would want to work with and collaborate with.
Absolutely. We'll do this one last one and then we'll call it, because I think we need to elaborate on this. But Tony asked, a lot of people talk about giving away free mixes to hook artists into working with you. Thoughts?
I think it depends upon where you are in your career. Today, I'm not going to do that. But I think there's a balance that you strike of like, when you, again, like if you find somebody out there that like, this is great material, I would love to work on it. It might be very different than somebody reaching out to you, just saying how much, and if you like, you're listening to something you're like, okay, this doesn't sound like I've got a lot of fixing that I would need to do. It's not the greatest song, but sure. And you'll work for it. And that price point is going to be different than somebody that, you're hearing it like really inspires you. Like, God, I would love to work on this. This would be great, and in some ways, even, as seasoned as we are, and there are so many other people that are like so far, advanced, in their career, like in Production Perspectives podcast. They had Andrew Sheps on there, and he was talking about a couple of records that he did. He's like had huge albums, and he was like, yeah, but a lot of those weren't the ones that he was really excited about. And some of the ones that like, you'll look at the artist on Spotify, and maybe the song has 2,000-3,000 plays. Like some of the projects that you're like are the most passionate about, because again, I'm still the consumer of the music, and I'm here to serve it. But sometimes you just hear a song, and you're like, that's a great song, man. Whatever it is, it's hitting me in my feels.
Yep.
And you just want to be a part of it. But I would just to put a button on this, like I would exercise caution in giving away free, even if it's a nominal charge, like $100 a song kind of thing. I think it also makes you have to get the client to invest in it, because like, what good is free? I don't appreciate it as much as if I pay for something and I'm a little bit more invested in it. So I think, still having some type of, whether monetary exchange or, I was like, oh, I can't pay you, but it's going to be great exposure. Like you get those club gigs, like, you got to sell tickets to your show, and we're still going to charge you at the door, and you don't get any cut of that, but it's great exposure. I mean, nobody pays the electrical bill on exposure bucks.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
But, finding some way that like you as the professional are at least being compensated in some form of value.
Yeah, actually, I have the exact same perspective. Yeah, we do take pennies, whatever it is. But like, I think if you are going to do free mixes, it should be for experience and at the beginning of your career, because you got to gain experience. And if you're not getting clients in, then figuring that out, but still figuring out how to set a precedence with them. Like, look, maybe you're just starting out, I'm just starting out. We could team up and we could do a 50-50 split in the back end. Even though I'm just starting my career, I'm not that good. You could leave that as a disclosure and then climb in the ladder that way. But eventually getting to a point where, free mixes probably shouldn't be in your business model. They're not going to pay the bills, unless it's like mutually beneficial. I work with artists that we do like back end stuff, that comes back to me. And so I have like, it depends on the artist though. Each one of us have like different agreements and things that we bring to the table. So, it really depends. But when it comes down to the free mixes, like should pretty much only be in the beginning of your career if you do it at all.
Right.
100%. Yeah, it's not sustainable. Exactly. Like it should only be purely based on experience. So you can gain experience. Cause like, let's face it. You could understand what a compressor does, but if you haven't put in the thousands of hours it takes to really hear it and feel it, like, you know, it's not going to do you any good. So you got to get, like, once you get out of school and you're just starting out, you got to start getting work on the table. So, you know, sometimes it is that.
And that's the thing, I think, what I was talking about earlier, like doing like live records of bands, you know, because they're so often thinking about making a studio style demo. But, you know, especially if you find a local act that just has amazing live energy, that's the place to capture it. You know, that project that I tracked in Luna was last year. You know, there's a band from North Carolina, and they came up and spent a week, and I was like, you know, they had some pretty like bad studio experiences with like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna isolate that, and all this stuff, and I was like, you guys have been slugging it out in the sort of the regional club circuit, and you've tightened up your live act. Like, I want to capture that.
Yeah.
You know, I want to get that thing that you do live on stage, and then you'll make refinements, of course. But it's like, I didn't want to take away from what they did. But, you know, that is an example of, you know, finding those artists and capturing their thing, you know. But yeah, I think, you know, recording bands live and offering that is still an area that I don't think a lot of people are doing. And it seems like, you know, should happen more.
It totally should happen more. You're going to gain so much experience from that. Like that, it really will teach you the ropes. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'm doing a live record Saturday night, you know, which, and I'm doing front of house for it also, but it's like, I'm just going to take, you know, the USB out of the console and slam it into Pro Tools and track it, and then I'll remix it later. And it's like, no. And again, so that for when you're doing both of those things, I'm like, not only do I have to like handle the aspect of just making it sound right in the venue, but I'm also thinking down the road, like I've got to get good gain structure coming in and cleanly capturing all of this stuff to make my mixing life easier. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. All right, Brian. All right, everyone. That is going to conclude it. I hope everyone gave Brian Reference Mix a follow. We do this every Tuesday, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, USA. So I also upload the full versions on YouTube. I need to start disclosing this. So if you came in late and you wanted to, you know, go back and rewatch it, I'm going to upload it to YouTube. Hopefully get it done this week. I'm getting better at doing the rendering of the video. That's a whole other freaking ball game. Man, I don't know how those guys do it. But
this will be number 9, right?
What's that?
This will be episode 9.
Episode 9. Yeah. We should have had more, but like sometimes TikTok doesn't record them.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think you see of that.
Yeah. So either way, thank you everyone. Thank you, Brian. We'll see y'all next week.
See ya.